Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today, we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and we're with our good friends Eric and Rabbi Ephraim and Denny, and we're actually now in part 4 because we've had the last three times, 3 weeks talking about what's going on with particularly Gaza and Hamas, and as we're leading into discussion of two-state solution. But you know, I know, Denny, based on our last discussion, and again, I would urge everybody, if you haven't, go through the last 3 because they're all significant and leading up to some things we want to talk about today. So, Denny, I know you had a question that you'd like to ask maybe to start off our session today.
Yeah, Eric, at the last session, talked about, characterized this dilemma over the next stage where Israel finds itself and where the world is observing. And I think Eric said that the occupation of Gaza has been at 70%. This next stage might take it up to 85%, and that all along the way, fighters have been taken out, terrorist fighters have been taken out, and that's largely completed, and that there unfortunately have been lost hostages all along the way as Israel has tried to balance this, free the hostages and remove Hamas permanently from power. What is it that's so unique about this next stage that the world has put new pressure, and Israel has felt compelled to view this as a stop and rethink moment?
I think the way I would look at it is the difference is that we know and here, let me elaborate. So your listeners may remember that, I forget the date, maybe Ephraim will remember the date, rough date, but there was a point when in the Rafah area, which is the southern part of Gaza, which is now 100% under control of the IDF, but there was a point when they were working on going through tunnels and clearing them, that they hit a tunnel in which, like the day before, there were 6 live hostages, and those 6 live hostages were executed in a very brutal way. I won't elaborate, but it was really brutal, torture before they were killed. But the Army didn't know. The Army didn't know that there were hostages under there, and they often don't know. When they go in a tunnel, they look. That's the first thing they're looking for, okay? And so they ran across the 6 bodies, and it was a big tragedy for Israel, of course. Now we know. When we go into Gaza City, we know there are hostages in these tunnels. We may or may not know, I say we, I mean the IDF, and the intelligence services, they may or may not know precisely which tunnel they're in. They may know, I don't know. But they know going in now that they're going to hit a tunnel where there are hostages and they're likely to be executed. So I think that's what's different. Now at this stage, we know going in is going to really no one's willing to say that this is what it is, but that's the reality, is that the hostages are extremely high risk at this stage. I don't know if I'm of a different opinion or not.
I'll just add that I think that Eric is expressing why within Israel there's more opposition to this stage of the war. But if you're talking about opposition from outside the country, all the protests that are coming from Europe and Canada and all these voices in the media screaming that Israel should not do this and not expand the war, that's really the reaction every single stage of this war from the very beginning. Every time Israel says we're going to take over Rafah because we need to control the border, every time we say we're going into 5 units or any place, the world screams and says Israel has to stop, there has to be a ceasefire. And this is our history with all the wars of Israel. As soon as Israel starts winning against its enemies, the world collectively freaks out and puts enormous pressure on Israel to not allow Israel to have the victory against its enemies, who always have started the war. So this is just, once again, the same old thing, that Israel should lay down its arms, declare a ceasefire, which means surrender to Hamas. Starting this war.
And that's that's as we know, actually, the best thing they can do is go back and have the ability to free up the aid there and actually serve the people. So they're going to do what's right, and of course there'll be consequences, as you say. As we look at Lebanon, what we've heard is that Lebanon has said we are going to disarm Hezbollah. And of course Hezbollah said, well, then we're going to kill everybody that's in leadership. And what do you see going on there? And what will Israel do or not do, or wait to see what happens in terms of what happens on the north side of Israel, which is Lebanon?
So my guess is you're not seeing in the Western press much about this, but not on a daily basis, but maybe every 2 or 3 days, there'll be a drone attack on a vehicle inside Lebanon, and then the next day there'll be an announcement that such and such leader of this unit of Hezbollah was assassinated with his assistant or something like that. And that happens frequently. Look, I'm not in Mossad, and I'm not in the intelligence services of the Israeli army, but their intelligence is impeccable in Lebanon. And largely the reason is there is a large part of the population in Lebanon that would just simply say, put a curse on the house of Hezbollah. I mean, they hate it and they want it out because it's interfering with the progress of Lebanon. So that's going on. And I don't know because it's not talked about publicly, but I have to assume that there's been a deal cut between the Trump administration and the leadership in Lebanon, basically looking something like the following. You guys not only just show us, but you actually disarm Hezbollah, okay? And you guys assert control with the Lebanese army in southern Lebanon. You accomplish that, and we guarantee you we're going to force the Israelis to evacuate their 5 or 6 outposts on the border with Lebanon. Because that seems to be the motivation behind the government in Lebanon, which to at least my surprise, I have to assume many Israelis surprised, that it seems to be actually working. There was recently a vote in the parliament, I think the cabinet, I don't think it was the entire parliament, to basically continue pursuing the disarmament of Hezbollah. The Hezbollah representatives walked out of the meeting in protest, and the rest of the Lebanese politicians went ahead to approve to continue going forward with the disarmament of Hezbollah. And again, I'm not in the Army intelligence, but from reading the press and looking at the stories from within Israel, for the first time in many, many, many years, it looks like the Lebanese government and army is actually starting to take control of their own country. And it's, I think it's largely, it would never have happened had Israel had not taken out Hezbollah. But the initiatives taken afterwards and the collaboration between Israel, U.S., and I think even Saudi Arabia, that all the right carrots are being put in front of the Lebanese government, that they have a chance of taking back control of their country and seeing it not flourish, once again, maybe flourish is the wrong word, but recover can happen if they continue along this path. Yeah. And it's in the interest of Saudi Arabia to make this happen as well.
Do you believe that will be achievable?
I think it will only be achievable if Israel can maintain its operations the way it does, launching very targeted, very specific attacks on limited numbers of individuals within the Hezbollah leadership. That needs to continue from now through eternity, as best I can see. And if that is allowed to happen, and then I think there's a chance it could work.
Rabbi, anything else to add to that discussion about what's going on in Lebanon?
Yeah, it's a part, I think, of a very different approach that Israel is now taking to its enemies on its borders. For about 20 years, perhaps more, Israel's policy was to rely on other people to protect us. So we relied on the UN. We had been sitting inside Lebanon. We had created in a previous war a buffer zone in order to prevent Hezbollah from moving in rockets and attacking Israel from southern Lebanon. And we had withdrawn way back when, around 20 years ago, under Barak, in order, and our security was then guaranteed to us by the UN, which said we will move in peacekeepers from all different countries who will make sure that they will do the job that Israel had done, which was prevent terrorists and rockets from moving into southern Lebanon. The UN then sat and observed. They were supposed to be observers. They observed as Hezbollah moved in tens of thousands of rockets targeting every single civilian population center in the country over the course of 20 years and did absolutely nothing about it. And similarly, in Gaza, Israel sort of sat on the border and allowed Hamas to build tunnels greater than the New York tunnel subways and arm itself to the teeth and hoped that there would be a sense of deterrence and that we could rely on deterrence and world pressure, et cetera. So Israel has now woken up through October 7th and the aftermath and the rockets that poured down on us from Iran and from Lebanon, Hezbollah. And so we're not going to go back to that reality anymore. That did not work. And so we're now going to take our own security into our own hands, not rely on anyone else, make sure that there are no rockets and no Hamas terrorists in Gaza, and make sure that Hezbollah does not have the power to attack us from southern Lebanon.
Yeah, so that'll be obviously something to watch here coming up of how does that move forward in the next month or two relative to is it truly then going to be a good cooperation with Lebanon or not, and we'll see, because we know Hamas isn't going to just lie down and go easily, so it's always an interesting battle, but they don't seem to have the power anymore. Another topic that's of interest is Iran. Again, what we've heard since the destruction of their nuclear capability is they've recommitted to build it, at least ostensibly, that they're having a dramatic failure of their economy, including a statement just a few days ago that they've run out of water for their population. And it seems to me it's collapsing because of it. First of all, bring us up to date on what you know about that. And then two, where do you see it going here in the next several months relative to this dramatic kind of degradation of what's happening in Iran?
Okay, so I'll go first. I'd like to remind your listeners of something. In the right aftermath of, I think they called it Midnight Hammer. I may have the name wrong. That was the operation that the United States went in and dropped bunker-busting bombs on the 3 nuclear sites. And then there's, subsequent to that, the ceasefire. There were many voices in the United States on the fringe right and large parts of the left claiming that it was a mistake that the United States did and that they really only set back the program by months. And this was coming from some ridiculous statements from the government and intelligence agencies. So here we are, 2 months basically afterwards, and there's no sign at all that they're anywhere close to recovering. So all those voices were nonsensical and had no idea what they were talking about, just like they still don't know what they're talking about. The nuclear program was set back significantly by both Israel's actions and then subsequent to that, the American launch of the bunker-busting bombs. That's number one. It was just publicly disclosed in Israel here that this 400 or 500 kilograms of enriched uranium that was stored by Iran in some place that it wasn't clear that any of the bombs took it out. It seems to be implied, although not clearly said by the Israeli government, that the government knows where it is and knows what the situation is and is watching, as does the United States intelligence, and they're both watching the situation quite closely. So I wanted to start with that. The reports you're reading about Iran are an understatement. The problem with water in Iran is a problem also in Iraq and in other parts of the Middle East, where there's been a mismanagement of water resources. And of course, weather. There's been a sustained heat wave throughout the area over much of the summer, and it's dried up a lot of their reservoirs. And there's literally no water in Iran at the moment to provide its population to drink. It's a severe problem. And I also want to remind your listeners that the United States has imposed severe sanctions on Iran, and they were renewed by the Trump administration. They were relieved a lot by the Biden administration, but the Trump administration reinstated almost all of them. But the European Union still has forgiven some of the sanctions and is still permitting a lot of trade with Iran because it was still adhering to the agreement that was signed by the Obama administration years ago with Iran. But that comes to a close at the end of this month of August. And at that point in time, Europe needs to make a decision. Are they going to then, they're saying publicly that unless there's an agreement between Iran and the United States, that it is basically going to resurrect and reimpose the sanctions. It's my opinion, again, I don't have privy to all the information about the economy in Iran, but based on what I know, this is going to have a major impact on Iran, okay? Because what trade and things are able to sneak in and out through a porous border and a porous trade with Europe, if the Europeans really, A, live up to their word, and B, once they even declare they're going to resurrect the sanctions, they actually don't do it like they normally do it, which is basically blink, blink, and give them whatever they want under the table because it benefits their companies, and that's what France does typically, but they really live up to their obligations, then it's based on what I'm reading in some of the English press in Iran and so on, that it's going to have a major, major impact on Iran and the economy. And I think from what I've read, that the regime is actually worried about its survival at that stage. But that's a lot of this. And the Europeans are just notorious for saying one thing and then doing something else, or saying one thing and then wink, wink under the table. They basically violate everything they said above the table. So a lot of us in Israel are skeptical the Europeans will do that.
Rabbi, any thoughts on that?
Not much to add, except that it's the same symptoms as the other stuff that we have been discussing a lot. Does the Western world, is it willing to take the pain of recognizing that these regimes are evil, radical Islamic regimes that want to destroy the West, and compromising and tolerating and capitulating to totalitarian evil regimes never ends up well. Is Europe going to make that choice and give in and allow them to keep on expanding their power and threatening because they'll make a few statements, or are they going to wake up and recognize how serious this threat is and be willing to fight and take the pain to deal with it?
Is there a similar way to set up an aid mechanism for the people of Iran, similar to what you guys described in Gaza, with the government as weakened as it is, or is that a miscalculation?
No, there's really no way that Israel can facilitate that in any way.
But the world, Europe, and the West.
Does the UN? I don't know. It's my cut that the Iranian regime is too proud to permit aid to be distributed by outside organizations. But we never know. One really doesn't know. There are a lot of rumors in the Israeli press, maybe not rumors, that the Ayatollah, Ali Khamenei, is actually either on drugs all the time or stays underground and no one sees or talks to him. And therefore the Iranian Islamic Republic is being kind of run by somebody else. I don't have a clue who that somebody else might be, or a group of people. My guess is that both the U.S. and Israeli intelligence organizations probably know, but we don't know.
Do you predict then that the company or the country will collapse because of, if your economy is being shot and you have no water, et cetera, your population, something has to happen. Do you feel like it will collapse, or there'll be just, business as usual?
Look, one can talk about regime change. And regime change involves a lot. And I don't foresee that happening even if there's a major famine. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has a monopoly on arms. They are extremely ruthless. They kill, and they have no problem torturing and killing anyone they feel that crosses their way, crosses the street in the wrong way, or wears the hijab the wrong way. And so they have the general population really intimidated, okay? And, if a family can't provide water to its children, they see their children starving, what will they do? I don't know. Maybe they'll just watch. It sounds terrible, but because they have regime change, where have there been revolutions in the world? There have always been a leader or a set of leaders have emerged that have challenged the control of the existing regime. It's happened in Russia with the Russian Revolution. It's happened in South Africa. Sometimes it's violent like it was in Russia. Sometimes it's not so violent like it was in South Africa. There has to be a personality or sets of personalities that can unite the country in a way that can take out the regime. Despite all the statements that the son of the former Shah makes, about forming a government. He has no respect or authority amongst the general population. So there's no such entity or groups of people that are on the horizon that can challenge the current regime. So I don't see that happening.
Yeah. And then as we talk about this whole thing of the Middle East and these countries that are saying we're going to recognize a Palestinian state, could you speak into that a little bit about, does that mean anything at all? Because, another country, I guess, can say this and say so, but does it really matter? And, what's your perspective on what they're doing and the impact that it will have on Israel?
The reality is these ridiculous statements, maybe they help a little bit the morale of the Arab public in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Maybe it gives them a night of, world terrors. It's great. But everybody knows that these things are really absent of any real teeth. And everyone also knows that the Palestinian Authority has absolutely no capability of governing. It's proven itself over, since 1992 that it is incapable of creating a government that can govern. All it's capable of doing is stealing money for its own, individuals and the senior elements of the government. There's nothing. I came to Israel in 2010, and I was living in an apartment, a small building, and my neighbor was a woman of Turkish descent, but a lawyer from Germany. And she and about 40 compatriots were sent by the European Union around that time to try to help the Palestinian Authority establish a rule, create a judiciary, create a police department, create, a dog pound. Everything that comes with a governing authority, help them create. And she invited me to a couple of their parties, and where I met all these Europeans, and I kept asking them, are you enjoying living in Jerusalem? They didn't live in Ramallah. They were helping the Palestinians. Every day they would get in a bus, and they would go across the border and go to Ramallah, do their thing, and come back, and then have a good time living in Jerusalem. If they were really authentic, they would have stayed in Ramallah, where they were helping the population they supposedly care about, okay? So I would say to them, I hope you're enjoying yourself in Jerusalem. Oh, we are a great deal. It's a lot of fun living in the city, because I don't see you staying here much longer. Because the guy you're helping, Salam Fayyad, who was he's a nationalistic Palestinian, but unlike everybody else, he actually understands what it means to govern and create an economy and create a government. Because he was a member of the world, he was in the governing body of the World Bank. I don't remember his position. He was very senior in the World Bank. So he understands how to create these entities. And they were there to help him. I said either he's going to be killed by the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, or they're going to remove him from power. 4 months later, he was pushed aside, and they all went home. And there's no interest in creating a government. There's absolutely zero interest. They don't care. All they care about is destroying the one government that seems to be succeeding in the area, and that's ours.
Yep.
They really don't. If they really cared about their population, they would revamp their school system. They would create an economy. They would create anything anyone in the world will buy. Nothing. Their entire economy is based upon aid from the UN. That's it. What kind of world is this? It's been going on for 80 years. This is ridiculous. Yeah. Don't you think it's time this thing changes?
Rabbi, any add to?
On top of everything else, I agree with Eric wholeheartedly. On top of everything else, all of the international aid, which is going to prop up the Palestinian Authority, which governs supposedly the West Bank, they spend 10% of it giving money away to terrorists and their families in order to promote terrorism. It's actually in their law books. There are government ministries with hundreds of employees who are in charge of distributing hundreds of millions of dollars a year to people that have killed innocent Jews in order to continue that process. So this is who they represent. And a good friend of mine is a journalist for the Jerusalem Post, an Arab Muslim named Khalid Abu Tuame. And he's been saying for 25 years, he refers to the Palestinian Authority as a thugocracy, just a bunch of thugs who are using their leadership positions in order to steal millions and sometimes billions of dollars from the international aid that they receive, and with zero interest of creating any type of viable economy or government. Their only interest is to continue creating an angry population at Israel and continue creating conflict so that they can continue receiving international aid, which they can continue to steal That's the thugocracy that has been created. And so when countries like Canada, England, and France call for a Palestinian state, they're just completely out to lunch, ignoring reality, encouraging terrorism. On what grounds does the Palestinian Authority deserve to have a state? They've shown every evidence that anything that they will be given will be used to create more terrorism against Israel and the West. It's not only that it does nothing towards creating this illusion of a state, but it emboldens the terrorists and makes them feel, let's do a few more October 7th and we'll get a few more countries supporting a Palestinian state, and maybe we'll be able to put enough pressure on Israel that Israel will have to capitulate.
Let me try this a slightly different way, because let's ignore Israel. Let's ignore the Jewish state. Let's assume that they don't really care for the moment, okay? If you were a leader and you were getting all this aid from all over the world, and you really cared about your people, wouldn't you take this money and try to find some industry or some specialized form of agriculture or something to invest in with your people to try to create something that people would buy overseas so that you could create some kind of an economy and jobs for your people? Wouldn't that be something you would do if you really cared about your country? But they don't. They don't do this. There's never been anything like this I can recall in the history of the world, and I read a lot of history, where you have this sickness like this that's worldwide, where people just hand money to this organization expecting change. Was it Albert Einstein that once said, instead he's doing this, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a difference? It's insane. If you look at this thing from the outside, like 10,000 foot altitude down, you can say the world is totally crazy for perpetuating the situation. It's nuts.
Yeah. And as we, unfortunately we're out of time and we finish here, but what you just said, and we would like to explore this next time when we come together next 3 or 4 weeks, is what do you see as Israel's position relative to prophecy? And do the people have a sense of destiny? And what you stated, which is what I've observed, I observed it personally when I was there, is that in Israel, this whole thing that you just discussed is that there's no movement toward building anything. Means it's demonic. It's a spiritual thing that is capturing the whole population, that they don't think anything of normal progression. It's truly just kill, steal, and destroy, and they don't even build up themselves, which is always interesting to me. So we'd like to have a discussion about that, about, do the people sense a prophetic place? Where do you sense it is? We have some thoughts about that, both Old and New Testament, that talk about that, which is why we have our topic on End Times Friday centered around Israel. We know. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing. Rabbi, thank you for taking an hour away from your vacation there in Canada and being on with us. We appreciate that so much. Eric, thank you so much again for your wisdom and insight and just information that helps us. And Denny, thanks for your perspective and your questions. And we're just so privileged. We just can't say enough how privileged we are. People keep reinforcing, hey, keep those guys going, and we will. So have a great trip, and I hope you're safe there in Canada, and look forward to seeing you soon. And so thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. If you have questions from today's broadcast, send them in to us at questions@abideministries.com. We'll see you next time.
Yep, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.